So I think we're going to shift just a little bit in our focus right now under the title of Perspectives from Building Design and Commissioning. Our first speaker is an architect from the University of Oregon. Please welcome Kevin Van Dem Wymelenberg. I even practiced this. Wymelenberg.
I practiced it too. And I often hear the phrase, I even practiced. So sometimes I trip. I was asked to give a talk on what the design community needs to incorporate, what we need to incorporate consideration of microbiomes into the built environment, into the design of buildings. So it was a question very much about what, but I'm going to spend most of my talk on how. We've heard a lot about what today, and I'll give you one slide or two at the end about what, but I'm going to talk mostly about how because I think the process is really critical. We talked about terminology, so who here sees biomass on the left or on the right? So if you're an architect, you might see biomass as the image on the left, which is woody pulp you use to burn and make energy for heat in your buildings. And otherwise, you may be thinking biomass looks something more like what's on the right. And just in case you thought the previous speaker on hay chairs was crazy, it happens. Maybe it's actually birthday parties on a farm theme in the urban environment is a consistent intervention for inoculation, or more extreme scenarios, right? So I think all of this is coming, there's this notion of a healthy dose of skepticism and a little bit of pumping of the brakes in a lot of the things that we've talked about is pretty important because we architects, we designers, we're innovators. We like to imagine possible futures. And you give us a little information and we come up with a solution, whether or not it's well-formed, tested, vetted, et cetera. So I think the notion of understanding who architects are is pretty important. When I was trained in architecture, graduated in about 2000 with my first degree, this gentleman, rather imposing looking figure there named Rem Koolhaas was the Pritzker Prize winner in architecture that year. And I'll admit I wanted to be like Rem. And I think learning a little bit more about how architects work will be valuable, and building these relationships will really be the only way to make sure that we're separating I don't know, the wheat from the chaff, or the good science from the snake oil. So this is architects working around a table on a design project, and one of the things about architects is we're inherently interdisciplinary because we're often described as the jack of all trades, masters of none. We are integrators of knowledge, and so lacing in chemistry and biology is not all that foreign. We just don't have experience doing it yet. We've got a lot of experience working with landscape architects, with mechanical engineers, with electrical engineers, with product manufacturers, and dealing with navigating the client-driven motivations of cost and aesthetics, and trying to balance that with beauty. This is the process. It's an iterative process, so getting involved early and often, I think, is really the way to make change in architecture. A little bit more about who. Fast forward 16 years, and this gentleman is the present day Rem. It's Alejandro Aravena from Chile, and he won the Pritzker this year. And I'm going to go through a quick litany of projects that he talked about, but I need to switch to this mode. Hopefully this works. Excellent, and you don't see my cheat sheet. All right. So these are projects by Alejandro. Again, this is what architects today are looking at as their aspirational goals. And architects like Alejandro and many can take a blank slate. They can formulate an idea based upon a theme, a partie, a concept, some formative idea. We can establish it within the context and we can make a building. This is the dream. This is what we do. And Alejandro says, if there's any power in architecture, it's the power of synthesis. So he says, the more complex the issue, the more the need for synthesis. A possible motivation for design is the capacity, the surprise, the forces pushing and pulling in opposite directions can be channeled in one direction through design so that the different stakeholders, different kinds of people, different institutions, different desires, different visions of the world can add to a common vision. So, if you think you know building scientists, if you think you know building engineers, don't assume you know architects. At University of Oregon, I'm teaching a studio right now to architects, and this is the reason of being for architecture students. It's a 6-credit course, it's 15 hours of contact per week, and we look at a design problem. In this case, we're designing a fictional building for our recently launched Health and Energy Industry University Consortium. It's a 25,000 square foot facility with lab spaces for biology, chemistry, and architecture. Yes, there are architecture labs. And it's right along the Willamette River in Portland. It's got the particulate matter of I-5 that it has to deal with, surrounded by transportation on all sides. It's right next to all of the Oregon Health Science University chemistry and biology labs that are spitting out toxic plumes from their building. And we're parking the future healthiest building in the world in the midst of all of this, right? That's our goal. That's the problem I've given to my students. And so we're asking them to consider these REACH standards like net zero energy buildings and the well building standard, which I want to be careful here because some of these folks are my friends, but there's this pumping of the brakes between snake oil and excitement over new knowledge and well-vetted research that are underlying these REACH standards. And I think it's our goal to make sure we make friends with these folks and bring the science to them in a meaningful way. We are asking the students to make net zero energy, net zero water, net zero waste. We have 0 red list materials. We want to capture and treat all the lab chemicals that our building is emitting, as well as the buildings around us. We consider circadian health a priority. We want to have on-site food production. And of course, we want to have healthy indoor microbiomes. And when they ask me the question, what does that mean? I give them these answers. In fact, I had one student do a case study on every single paper we did in their green bio BE lab. And she made a fantastic presentation of all the results to the other architecture students in the class. And when she came to me at the end, she said, privately, I took this class because I thought you would teach me something I could use. And I was left with my heart sunk to the floor, and I went back and I thought, what can I do next to inspire? So I reread this paper, a little plug for Charlie's paper. Charlie Brown is Jessica Green's partner at the BioBE Center, and I am working to fulfill his shoes. And I think what's most important is that we deliver these messages in a way that inspire. Because that's what will attract attention and motivate architects. This is BedZed in England. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And if our answer is more ventilation in dry buildings, we're going to lose architects' creative possibility. And I think it's important to harness their creative potential to further our science. So the question I've been posing is, do we have to choose between energy and health in buildings? And I think there are some synergies, but I think we've heard enough to believe that there are possibly also some contradicting elements here, especially with the heating and cooling requirements of fresh air, the pressure associated with increased filtration of that air. Of course, I'm answering that question with a loud no, and trying to inspire the students to think about architecture that can do both of these things. This is the Eastgate Center in Harare, Zimbabwe, by an architect named Mick Pierce, and he's doing a sabbatical at University of Oregon this year, so we're getting to know one another. And he's done this building that's really designed all around kind of a biomimicry approach to termite mounds. And it's driven on stack ventilation. Stack ventilation is a great strategy for bringing outdoor air into the building with low or no energy cost. And it's a cooling strategy for half of the year, or depending on your climate. So you can save energy from cooling as well. And it also is beautiful. And so our goal is to help translate this science at the Eastgate Center. One of our goals is to help translate this science to an architectural form that inspires. Here are a building as a ventilation system. We talk about in daylighting, I talked a little bit about this to some of you already. In daylighting, we talk about the building as a light fixture. Now we need to think about architectural design as a ventilation system. And here are a couple of examples of that. This is Zion Visitor Center, where they're using a cooling tower for downdraft evaporative cooling. This is the Austrian pavilion at the 2015 World Expo, designed by Transolar, or designed with Transolar, where they're exploring urban agriculture, evaporative cooling for outdoor comfort, using that evaporatively cooled outdoor air for inlets to indoor air, and of course doing all of this with beauty and delight. So that's number one, inspire. Number two, visualize. I spend a lot of my time trying to take scientific data and make it relevant to architects, put it into a terminology that they get excited about and that they understand. So this one happens to be about cross ventilation, so wind-driven ventilation, and we're looking at the pressure zones in a wind tunnel and different roof shapes and how we were surprised to find negative pressure zones on the windward side because of the architectural roof shape. I could have given them the pressure coefficients around a building, but it wouldn't have excited them, and it maybe would have been useful to a mechanical engineer, but it wouldn't have changed the design process without visualization. I think some of the work that the Dornston lab is doing is really critical, and I think more of us need to be taking that as an aspiration for the way we represent our information. This is another project we're working on, indeed trying to influence architectural design with microbiome thinking. We're looking at a lobby space of a large institutional building, and we had 3 design alternatives. Again, iterative approaches, right? These graphics on the bottom are the distribution of CO2 based upon night flush and daytime fresh air ventilation approaches. And what you see in the image in the bottom left corner is a lot of diversity across that floor plate from a CO2 parts per million representation. And that was our first design strategy, our second, and our third. And the goal was here to get a well-mixed room. We were providing the required amount of fresh air in all of these scenarios, but it was short-circuiting in a couple. These are a little hard to see at this scale, but these are the first 2 alternatives. And if you look closely, or if I could blow these up and slow it down for you, you'd see that these airflows are getting short-circuited based upon where they're locating the inlets and the outlets. This was an outdoor green space away from the particulate matter of the road in an urban setting, as far away as we could get from the roads. And then the stack here in a double height space with a security desk right at this crux. The stack here for the outlet. And in our third solution, we brought inlets down low from both sides with that common outlet and resulted in a much better mixed room. And in case Hal asked a question about ppm, here we can see 3,000 ppm on the left and 400 ppm on the right. And so the question is, have we solved the problem? Well, no, not yet. We need more fresh air, and probably we need to design for not the absolute max allowable occupancy by fire code, but rather a more reasonable, regular, everyday occupancy. Okay, so the next is REACH. And I use that as a shorthand for REACH standards. So the way that this knowledge will likely find its way into architectural practice first is through aspirational REACH standards like the U.S. Green Building Council's LEED program, the Living Futures Institute Living Building Challenge, and the Well Building Standard. Now each of these have their pluses and minuses. And some of them are really expensive to participate in, but this is the way new information, new science about healthy buildings, energy efficient buildings is coming to practice. And then from there, it's a test bed, if you will, and from there it translates in time into energy codes or air quality standards, like the Ventilation 170 standard for hospitals. So I have a personal experience with this on the daylighting realm, and I can tell you it's a long slog. It's an arduous journey, and it takes a balance of scientists, engineers, architects, and design practitioners of all sorts, as well as manufacturers. We use a kind of NIST-driven, balanced approach to our committee structures, and in this particular example, the problem was, we're not all using the same methods to design daylighting in buildings, And there's not enough foundational research to say what's good about daylighting in buildings. How much does it impact people and health outcomes? Sound familiar, right? And so in that process, we went and got a big grant. We got involved with the Illuminating Engineering Society. Perhaps in air quality we'll be chasing ASHRAE or ASHE for hospitals. And we built a partnership with them. In fact, we brought practitioners from that consortium to help inform the research design, all at the same time while trying to ensure that we maintained academic integrity and that we didn't let manufacturers drive the agenda. A balanced approach for sure, one that took 6 years, two-hour phone calls every week to design the research problem, execute the research, and then analyze the results, and finally create a document that we could submit for approval through, in this case, IES. So this is perhaps who we need to get to know on the air quality side. ASHRAE Technical Committee 9.6, specifically looking at healthcare facilities. There are others, of course, depending on what particular standard you're interested in influencing. And here are the 20 people. If you don't know these 20 people and you want your research to matter in healthcare facilities, we better get to know them. All right, finally the what. Which and how microbes impact human health and well-being, mood, and satisfaction. I'm kind of riffing on a few of the words from you all through Twitter as well as from the room today, and I think that we can say that this is a big area. Not just presentations, sorry. I'm not going to read all the little words. So number one, which and how microbes impact human health. So how does it result in health outcomes? Predictive models and spatial visualizations is not of that new knowledge is key for reaching architects and engineers and owners. And I thought Fabian gave a nice presentation on models, and of course we need to remember they are models and we need sound data, but we need a lot more folks working in this space. And then again, focus as much on the how as on the what and the process I just described. Okay, a couple other things I just wanted to show. These are things I heard today that I took, or this week, that I took away as really priorities, at least for me. Peter's work on visualization, Jay's priorities for what we need to know about in the built environment, and Rob Knight's notion of, architectural fecal transplants and barns to homes, perhaps. Lastly, funding. I draw some correlations to my first 15 years of my career on energy work. And I mentioned this at the Sloan Moby talk, or Sloan talk as well. I think there are lessons we can learn from the way we've approached energy efficiency as a problem in the built environment, and use the lessons from that to make quicker progress here. But the biggest of those is perhaps to recognize the degree and the differential in the disparity in the funding right now. Energy efficiency utility incentives in the US crested $7 billion a couple of years ago. So these are utilities paying people to use less of their product. $7 billion worth of investment. In 2017, the Energy Efficiency Renewable Energy Department within DOE, and specifically their energy efficiency research bucket, not their renewables bucket, is almost $1 billion. And in 2015, one nonprofit in the Pacific Northwest harvests nearly $40 million a year worth of funding from electric utilities to promote regional energy efficiency progress. In the microbiome space, we're looking at fractions of those numbers right now, even with the exciting microbiome initiative claiming $520 million over the next 4 years, or roughly $100 million in the next year. And what about the percent going to microbiome research within the built environment? I don't know what fraction of it is, but less than 10% probably. Maybe I'm wrong there, but nonetheless, there is a huge disparity, and I think we can show the Bullitt Center as proof that funding works, and I hope that the processes I describe will be helpful. This is our team. I'm 2 years into following microbiome research and a year into collaborating with Jess. And I can say it's fascinating. So if we play our cards right, I'm sure, and architects are immediately asking tough questions about how how to make this relevant to their building. So you have their attention. Let's capitalize on it.
Our next speaker is going to come to us remotely. It's Robin Gunther from Perkins & Will, Perkins plus Will in architectural and design from the United States. Robin is an expert on sustainable design in healthcare settings.